Have you ever had to prove to someone that something everyone can see is an illusion? No? Well, that's what many free will skeptics would have you do. Prove that free will is not an illusion. But that is absurd. Just like it would be absurd to demand that you prove you don't have a second blind spot. Given that we can experience free will directly, it is on the free will skeptics to provide the evidence that it's an illusion. And they have. And not just any evidence, but empirical evidence. Data from many different neurological studies. Is free will debunked? Did the studies make a fatal flaw in the reasoning? Stay around to find out. To start with, let me mention the basic argument all the studies against free will make. Proposition 1. The reported experience of free will should causally occur before neural activity. Proposition 2. Neural activity occurs first. Conclusion. Therefore, the will is not free. And I think it makes a lot of sense. Free will by definition should occur as the first cause that is uncaused by anything external to itself. Therefore, if the decision is made subconsciously, before we have the experience of making a free decision, then the freedom we experience must be an illusion. On the other hand, if the experience was first, then it would be possible that the will is free. We have to differentiate between the actual free will choice and the surface level manifestation. What do I mean by that? Imagine that you are a football player and you want to give it your best. You are in a football match and a teammate passes you the ball. An enemy player tries to take your ball, but it is raining and he slips, so you go past him. You shoot the ball and the goalkeeper doesn't manage to catch it, so you score. Similarly, if I asked you why does the water put into a cup take its shape, you could say that it's because of the liquid properties of the water and the shape of the cup, which are of course true. But it's also because of the gravity. There can be more than one variable causing something to happen, and just because you can name a chain of events doesn't mean that you have exhausted all the possibilities. We have to look not only at the temporal causation, but also at the hierarchical causation. Why did you score? Because you wanted to win the match. Why? Because you wanted to be a good football player. Why? Because you wanted to do your best. Why? No further reason. It's what you decided to do. And that's the level we should be looking at, where there is a decision without a prior reason, the deepest part of the why hierarchy, the summum bonum. You can imagine it as the vague intention given to an AI system, such as, I want to better my life. Get off your fat ass and do some push-ups. We know two things for certain. We definitely have a summum bonum that is the cause of our actions, as we could not theoretically nor practically have an infinite regress of reasons for why we do things, and free will cannot be caused by something external, which makes summum bonum the only candidate to measure free will. Because of this, a free decision has to be distinguished from a calculated decision, where the latter is any decision in a long process of thinking, such as the one that gets the AI from the intention to the final conclusion, which has nothing to do with a free decision. What's important to understand when measuring free will is that it is the position within the hierarchy that is important, rather than what occupies it. It's entirely possible that scoring that one goal was your summum bonum, sacrificing everything, including your match, the future career, family, dignity, using any means necessary just to score that one goal. It's just very unlikely that someone would sacrifice so much more important things for something so insignificant. Furthermore, all this assumes that our will is united, which is generally not the case. We frequently do things that contradict each other. Just the other day, I decided to buy a chocolate bar because it's tasty, but delayed eating it until after my hot dog because it's healthier. So which is it? Do I want to be healthy or experience immediate pleasure at the cost of my long-term health? Short answer, yes. So we could have multiple competing summum bonums, not just one, which never ends well. Nevertheless, it is still much more likely that a higher abstract value change would reflect a free will change than a shallow, insignificant value change. So here's the evidence. Since Rationality Rules has made a video about debunking free will and left the sources to the scientific papers he used, I'm going to use them as they get the point across really well. First of all is the infamous Libet experiment, performed in 1983. It shows how brain activity, or specifically the readiness potential, precedes the reported conscious intention to act by at least several hundred milliseconds. This follows the argument against free will I laid out earlier, where if a change in neural activity precedes conscious intention, then the will cannot be free. This, however, was a pretty old experiment, so Stephen provided more recent ones where the readiness potential occurred as far back as 10 and 15 seconds in 2 separate experiments. 15 seconds is a long time, so I guess this is it. Should we put the nail in the coffin for free will? Well, let's just check what sort of interesting methods they came up with to measure the depth of meaningful decisions that would ensure we are measuring the summum bonum and not just a shallow manifestation of it at the surface. Okay, well, it's an old experiment. I'm sure the newer ones did a better job. If this was a competition to find the least likely method to measure free will, I would be impressed. This could be so easily avoided. The reason these experiments fail is because they didn't measure a free will change at all. They instead measured a change in calculated decisions. And it seems that neither the scientists nor the participants are even aware of that. An arbitrary choice between 2 buttons is almost as meaningless as it can be. And I'm not the only one to think this way. A much more recent paper from 2020 by Liad Merdek et al. Says that the Libet-style experiments have only focused on arbitrary, unreasoned, meaningless and purposeless decisions, which do not reflect free will, and propose that economics would be a much more interesting area to study. I don't know how likely it is for businessmen to stop being greedy money grabbers and start valuing others over their business, but it's still better than a Libet-style experiment. I don't know which intentions the participants came to those experiments with, but I can imagine that it could either be to help advance science or write that they were part of an experiment in a CV or something like that. And they likely had those intentions long before the experiment started, and they likely haven't changed throughout the experiment at all. Not only that, but those intentions were likely not the summum bonum in the first place, but nested within intentions even higher on the hierarchy of values. A free will change is not something easy to measure. An example of a more meaningful change in free will could be a person deciding that they have something more important than doing the experiment. You can see why such a change would be problematic to measure. It's because people wouldn't be willing to change what they value for a short science experiment. Another paper from 2022 by Liad Merdek et al. Argues that unconscious influences don't threaten free will, but provide information about its limitations in specific circumstances, which just goes to show that calculated decisions have to be distinguished from actual free will decisions. Anyone that plays the piano knows that once they learn how to play, it happens automatically. There is some unconscious brain circuit responsible for each learned tune. It's definitely the same with random flicking of wrists or pressing of buttons. Many times have I tried to randomly tap my fingers in an unpredictable pattern. However, once, when I focused, I noticed that I was actually moving my fingers in a perfect order from left to right. It was a learned movement, which means that each finger movement was a calculated decision. This is why it's so important to first carefully consider what the thing we want to measure is, and what kind of experiment will actually measure it so we don't end up measuring a straw man. In conclusion, the burden of proof is on the free will skeptic. If a change in neural activity casually precedes a change in free will, then there is no free will. The summum bonum must be used to measure a free will change. The studies only measure a calculated decision change. There is no evidence that free will is an illusion. Therefore, we are free. If you enjoy my response to the evidence against free will and want to see some positive evidence instead, check out this video. And while you're at it, you might as well check out the rest of the free will playlist.